Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started, so if you could grab your seat, that would be fantastic. Hooray, welcome. Hi, my name is Laura Watkins. I'm the director of the startups program at Rackspace, and I'm the session chair for this room this afternoon. We are very, very pleased to announce our next speaker, who's going to be discussing dispelling the genius programmer myth through code review. Let's all give a very warm round of applause for Ashwini Oruganti.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Ashwini, and you may know me from some of these places. I am a software engineer living in San Francisco, and I'm here to give the last talk of the day. I know you're all tired, so I'll try to be nice and make it interesting. Ever since I was a kid, I had always wanted to be good at things without trying. The first time I came across a piano, I tried to play my favorite song on it and somehow expected it to be all in tune without any training whatsoever. I failed. The first time I tried to ride a bike, I wanted to have a smooth sail and not fall. I did fall. Every time I tried to do something new, I expected excellent results on the first attempt. Along the way, many falls and failures later, it became quite clear to me that this was not how things work. So I hoped the same when I started programming. You could say I was lazy, and popular culture makes success stories sound like talent is all it takes, that a successful person has an intellectual gift, which is far greater than what most people have in a given area. And not just in programming, it's the same in music or mathematics, in running or in dancing. And by that natural ability, they're going to far excel the rest of us, almost as if by destiny. In 2009, Fitz and Ben, two engineers from Google, deeply analyzed this and gave an amazing talk. We've crafted a myth behind the ideal programmer. Hey, here's a genius. The genius goes off in a cave, writes this brilliant thing, reveals it to the world, and becomes famous forever. I mean, we all hear it so often. X writes excellent code. X is really smart. So I started investigating what those genius programmers are really like. Where do they get their ideas? How can they look at a piece of code and correctly predict that won't work or that won't scale? It is true that while being skilled and talented does help a lot, I realized that a large part of this is because they've put in so much deliberate practice behind this that they've iterated through various failure modes that when they do this now, when we look at them work, it almost feels like they're deciding everything instantaneously. And when you get to that level of specifics, you realize that there is no way, there is absolutely no reason why these things couldn't be learned, couldn't be taught, or couldn't be practiced. A great way, perhaps the best way to become an expert programmer is to have one teach you. Unfortunately, simply walking up to them and asking them to train you doesn't really work. I know this because I've tried. You will need to be more specific than that, it turns out. You will need to tell them what exactly it is that you want them to train in. So a good strategy here is to ask them to review something you've done. Even better, ask them to review something related to a project they care about. Often, the projects the expert programmers care deeply about are their own open source libraries. So what I'm saying is, go contribute to their projects, go contribute to open source projects. if you haven't already made any open source contributions yet, think about how you would want the experience to be. If you have already, think about your experiences so far. Do you feel happy, accomplished, or rewarded if your patch is accepted and merged? Do you feel valued if someone thanks you for your time and work? Well, I know I do. I definitely do. And most people agree. Successful contributions make us feel happy and productive. And I don't just mean a successful merge here. By a contribution, I mean right from the point where one starts working on an issue to when the maintainers and other community members start reviewing the patch, to finally when the said thing gets merged. So let's assume that we all buy into this. We would love to see more successful contributions. We want our patches to get accepted, and we want more quality patches for our software. So this leads us to the next part, now that we know that this is what we want. How do we make this process painless for contributors and efficient for maintainers? And more selfishly, because it all started with me wanting to be good at things, more selfishly, how do I become an expert contributor? And how do I get more people to work on improving the library I maintain and care about? But before we address those issues, we have a slight problem. This whole part about non-experts seeking feedback from the expert, this part is scary. It means sometimes showing people code that isn't already in a great shape. And people want to be seen as clever, and clever people don't make mistakes, right? There's this. Let's take an example. There's a thing called async IO that a lot of us here have been really excited about recently. It looks really good now. But taking a look into its history shows that a lot of discussions took place during its inception. Some were in person, some were documented online on mailing lists, groups. There were many iterations of design reviews and quite some rewrites. And that is how we got to the current state of async IO. A lot of people were involved in it. One person alone did not write it. So collaboration is not just essential, it's prerequisite. It's a prerequisite. It's a must-have, it's not a nice-to-have. And no one built things alone. I mean, not Guido, not Jessica, not Glyph, not Kenneth. All of these people that we know and respect, these experienced programmers lead their projects. They encourage collaboration and build a community around the things that they care about. They collect people who care and value about the same things as them and lead them. That said, all that said, it is sometimes frustrating to contribute when the maintainers won't just merge your patch in. They throw nitpicks at you or suggest an improved implementation or maybe request a rewrite. But they have a good reason to do it. Once your patch is merged in, they are the ones who will need to maintain it in future. Their goal is to make that as painless as possible, because all of this is happening on volunteer time. Yesterday, there was this amazing talk here by Augie and Nathaniel, where they started their talk by showing a slide which had never-ending lines of poorly organized code. And the slide was animated and pretty and everything, but every maintainer in the room winced at it and recognized the pain of maintaining such a project. All of them, I could see them praying hope that their work doesn't now or ever look like that. So every time someone mentions things like Pepe, linters, code coverage, continuous integration tools, or maybe asks you for more tests, they're not trying to block your progress by being nitpicky. They're just trying to maintain code quality. And there are always things that you can do to get those basic nitpicks out of the way. Every open source project that welcomes new contributors should have a style guide or basically a document of all of the guidelines that they want to see, that they want the users to follow. And every large open source project, like, as far as I know, most of them should have it. If they don't, it's a good idea to ask for it. But by making sure that you follow these guidelines, you're making the reviewer's job a lot easier. Also, the process that is documented may be wrong, or it's likely that you are missing some context. But I would recommend saving the camel case fight for later. Never forget that the reason you're doing this in the first place is to learn. So once you know that you have learned all of the context that there is behind this, that's the right time to pick fights or argue your way or discuss things. And people will respect you enough to not discard your opinions. So save that fight. Respect the process when you start. I know every potential code reviewer in this room will thank you for this. It makes large patches make their lives harder. And this is not just something we say to new contributors. This is something we need to remember throughout. For instance, someone wrote an excellent improvement to the logging system in Twisted. The only problem was that diff was extremely large. And so, despite having an active development community, that diff sat in the review queue for ages. It did get merged eventually, and we really, really thanked. There was this one person who sat down and did the review in 24 hours, and after months and months of it sitting there quietly getting no love. But gathering feedback early is always nice for you, for the reviewers, and ultimately for the project itself. Even if things don't feel complete, show your code. It's the right thing to do. And that's what you should, gathering feedback early means that you can work with your reviewer. Respect the maintainer's time is the basic message of this procedure, but it's also a really good way to learn. You can ask them to elaborate on their comments and suggestions. Say at some point you are asked to throw away everything that you've done, that the weeks and all that coffee that you drank, and someone just asks you to throw your code away and rewrite everything. That's sad. Gathering feedback early means you're allowed to ask them to elaborate on their comments and suggestions. You can afford to actually make a case for your code. And who knows, maybe you were right all along. Maybe the expert programmer made a mistake. Don't you ever find bugs in software written by expert programmers? So criticism is not evil. It is hard to take. And it is better taken when given as feedback. But even when it is presented without judgment, it's still just hard. So always remembering that the reason why you're actually contributing is because you want to be a genius, that helps. And I'm not just saying this. When I started working on Twisted, I promise this is the only slide with the ugly screenshots. So when I started out, this is one of my first reviews, and the same page has so many white space comments. And because I was getting the same feedback over and over again, I realized that I was making a systematic mistake. I was still getting used to my text editor, and I figured that maybe there must be some way to automate this. So I found a systematic solution. This review shaped the way for my future system setups as well. Now, every time I set up a new system, the first thing I do is to go configure my editor and automate as much code cleanup as possible. And I rarely see review comments like this. I rarely saw them again on Twisted or on any other projects. So embrace failures. It's easier said than done, I know. I am still pleasantly surprised that everyone in the Twisted community associates me with all of the cool things that I built and not with my white space mistakes, because that's how I remember my first week in Twisted as. But what's important is you learn from the mistakes and don't fail on the same thing repeatedly. Rather than being embarrassed by them, consider them to be context around your thought process. When you look back, surely there'll be cases where you'd go, hey, that was some piece of complete nonsense that I wrote. What was wrong with me? But then there might also be cases of, well, that approach led nowhere, or it makes the system fail. Let's not repeat it. Or better still, you might say, oh, that's why I did this. The context might help you in fixing broken parts later. So that was all a lot of guidelines for new contributors. I also am here to talk to my maintainer friends in the room. So hello there. It is really hard to see someone submit, say, a bug fix, which is completely wrong. You know you've seen this a lot. You know you've been doing this for years, and you know how this ends. But it's not easy to ask someone to completely reject their premise. And making sure that the communication is clear and effective is really important. It should also be non-personal and educational, but when I say non-personal, I want to say that the only personal part of the review should be the part where you thank them for their time and effort, where you value their contribution. And I will come to it soon. But yeah, like when my white space changes were highlighted, no one assumed that I didn't know anything about computers just because I don't know how to fix white space in my code. And that was valuable. It was presented without judgment. Also, if you care deeply about a style, you should document it visibly. And I'm not just saying this as a best practice. Twisted has about 5 documents that are presented as introduction for new contributors. We have spent years trying to merge them all into one. I think I wrote the 6th one, which was supposed to be the combination of all the 5. It never got finished, so we now have 6. I stand corrected. So make it visible. Don't confuse the contributor. And now, whenever someone comes up on IRC and asks for a contributing guideline document, it just depends on, it's completely arbitrary which choice they'll get. People might miss things. People might overlook seemingly obvious points. That does not make them blind. That does not make them be deserving of your wrath. So don't be unkind about it. While working on this talk, I went around talking to my maintainer friends, and I asked them what was their worst code review experience like. And my friend Ian, who maintains a lot of open source libraries, including requests, quoted this review from request that he wrote. The first line was this. And it did not end well. I'm not showing this example as the ideal review. This is the review that he said he regrets the most, and I could see why. This led to the person on the other end asking for more context around his criticism, why he thought things were wrong. And he explained it. And I mean, the discussion ended with them agreeing that, yeah, that's fine, I will not do it. But it would all have been so much more pleasant had he just started out with what he wanted to say in a nice way. So contrast this with another review that I got when I was working on Twisted. There was some logical error that I was making within, I think, with how I was organizing my if-else statements. And my reviewer mentioned the change that he would have liked me to make, provided a self-contained example of what I was doing and what was being suggested that I do. And then ended with a description of what the change would imply, why it would be more performant, or why it was a better idea. And I agreed. I saw the point that he was trying to make, and I never made that mistake again. So treating them as reasonable human beings you can have a logical discussions with is really important. Make your case. Describe the change that you're suggesting. Explain your thought process. It helps. And now that you know that they're there to learn, to be you, it should be more easier to understand their motivations of contributing to this thing that you care about. So do that. This was another example of my code review, one of my code reviews, where my reviewer, this had been going on for weeks. I was working on this really hard thing, and it started with a thank you. And I was like, OK. And then it went on to say that this looks really good. And I was happy. And then it mentioned how it requires a lot more changes, which is fine, because I'm already gloating now. And then it says that I am in the right direction. OK, that's some reassurance. So this is like such a good way to start a review. You're saying that you're thanking them, you're valuing their time, and you're working with them, you're encouraging your contributors. And you're also telling them early if they're taking the right or wrong approach, so they know when to abandon a particular track. This makes sure that they don't just quit or do a table flip or just vanish in the internet for some months or weeks and the pull request just sits there. So all this said, it's really important that both these sides of the coin work together. I was also, at some point, working on a TLS implementation in Python. And I was pretty much the only person working on it, so I can almost say that I was expected to be a maintainer for it. And the change taught me a lot of things. Some of them being that there is no such thing as not being qualified enough. For all of the years that I worked on Twisted, I did very few code reviews. At least in the first 2 years, I think I hardly did 1 or 2. It was not because I didn't have time or I found it annoying to review code. It was because I was there to be an expert programmer. And my assumption was that anyone reviewing my code is an expert programmer. So how do I review code then? I got such thorough reviews. They picked every potential mistake or anything that I overlooked. And I was never sure that I could do the same to their code. And it took a lot of encouragement for me to realize that it's all right to miss things. Again, what's happening here is deliberate practice. And that's why there's a community to work with. So once again, contributors, you will need to work with the maintainers and meet them halfway. And my maintainer friends, you will have to meet the contributors halfway. Be nice, kind, and respectful. Thank you. Do we have time for questions?
If there are no questions, we'll go ahead and conclude. Let's give her one more round of applause.
Thanks, everyone.